Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
All right, welcome to Wednesday. We're coming up on the 4th of July, which is very big in America, if you're not one of our American peoples. It is our Independence Day. Very important, very interesting. We'll be very, very busy. Friday we've got things. Saturday is booked full. So yeah, it'll be busy. I think we even got something tomorrow, but I don't remember. Anyway, it's going to be busy. Next weekend's going to be busy. All the weekends are going to be busy. All right, so I have got a bicycle race because today's video is about the Tour de France. Okay, let's try this again. So we've got Lakeshore, Ayfield, Phoenix, Lewis, Butterroll, Vaughan, Choco, Rushmore, Barry, Big Ben, A-Space, Scott, Day 1, Peach, Phoenix, Amboys, Generations, Skull, Yaji, Hillbillies, Sheena, Anthony. I thought I took out. Maybe I forgot. Oh well. Anyway, let's see here. Lose. Bring It. Jennifer. Yasmin. Lynch. Ava. Sandra. It's gonna be close. Butterroll. Alright, this is Miss Butterroll. Her name I'm not gonna try to pronounce, even though it was nice enough to include the pronunciation because I will butcher it. But she's got some cucumbers, Happy Mail. Sharing her journey, crafting, cooking, other skills. She's got some shorts, food, plants, gardening, crafting, and then, of course, lies, which I don't usually catch. Oh my goodness, I'm a ketchup girl. I didn't realize that would be kind. Anyway, these awesome sauces. Like, share, comment, and have a good day. All right, files, beware. The bearded historian has information, and he thinks he needs to share it with you. Please be patient with him. He's old and fuzzy and fragile.
And fuzzy and old and broken. Anyway, I got a list from Sue. And it had some interesting items on there. But there's one that I remember when I was a younger kid, back when dinosaurs still roamed the earth.
No, I miss the dinosaurs.
You had to knock rocks together to make sparks, stuff like that. But when I was younger, I remember when we had some athletes who would take place with the Tour de France. And to me, it was always kind of an interesting experiment because you had to go so many stages around France. Sometimes they went to England. They would go all over Europe in multiple stages. And I hated biking uphill anyway. These guys were pumping it out on a 10-speed, up in the Ardennes and all over the place. And so I decided to do a little research on what the Tour de France actually was. And, as they call it sometimes, nicknamed the Big Noop, Le Grand Boucle, Tour de France in French. And, this year, it'll be 122 years ago that it started. Interestingly, it's run in 112 years because they didn't do it during World War I or World War II.
How dare!
I know you don't want to be biking when you're getting shot at. And as it gained prominence and popularity, the race was lengthened and gained more international participation. The tour is a UCI World Tour event, which means that the teams that compete in the race are most likely UCI World teams, with the exception of teams that organizers invite. Traditionally, the bulk of the race is held in July, and while the route changes every year, the format of the race stays the same and includes time trials, passages through the mountain chains of the Pyrenees and Alps, and from 1975 to 2023, a finish on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Now, modern editions of the tour consist of 21 day-long stages over a 23 or 24-day period, covering approximately 3,500 kilometers or 2,200 miles total. Each year, the race alternates between clockwise and counterclockwise circuits of France. Now, 20 to 23 teams of 8 riders usually compete. All the stages are timed to the finish, and then the riders' times are compounded with their previous stage times. The rider with the lowest cumulative time is the leader of the race and wears the famous yellow jersey. Now, while the general classification attracts the most attention, there are other contests held within the tour. The points classification for sprinters with the green jerseys, the mountains classification for the climbers, a polka dot jersey, the young rider classification for riders under the age of 26 with white jersey, and team classification based on the first 3 finishers from each team on each stage. Achieving a stage win also provides prestige, often accompanied by a team sprint specialist or a rider taking part in the breakaway. A similar race for women was held under various names between 1984 and 2009. Following criticism by campaigners and professional women's peloton, a 1 or 2 day race, the course by Le Tour de France, was held between 2014 and 2021. The first Tour de France Femmes was held in 2022.
I had no idea.
Me either, yeah.
I've never even heard of it.
The Tour de France was created again in 1903, and the roots trace back to the emergence of 2 rival sports and newspapers in the country. On one hand was Le Vélo, the first and largest daily sports newspaper in France, and the other was L'Ado, which had been set up by journalists and business people, including Comte Jules Albert de Dion, Adolphe Clement, and Edouard Michelin in 1899. Now, the rival paper emerged following disagreements over the Dreyfus affair. The Dion, Clement, and Michelin were particularly concerned with Le Vélo, which reported more than cycling because its financial backer was one of the commercial rivals, the Carac Company. The Dion believed Le Vélo gave Debarque too much attention and him too little. The Dion was rich and could afford to indulge his whims. The new newspaper appointed Henri Desarage as the editor. He was a prominent cyclist and owner with Victor Gaudet of the Velodrome at the Parc des Princes. L'Ado sales were lower than the rival it was intended to surpass, leading to a crisis meeting on the 20th of November in 1902 on the middle floor of L'Ado's office at 10 Rue de Faubourg Montmartre in Paris. The last to speak was a chief cycling journalist, a 26-year-old named Gilles Lefebvre. Lefebvre suggested a 6-day race of the sort popular on track, but all around France. Long-distance cycle races were a popular means to sell newspapers, but nothing of the length Lefebvre suggested had ever been attempted. Well, the first Tour de France, again staged in 1903, the plan was a 5-stage race from the 31st of May to the 5th of July, starting in Paris and stopping in Lyon, Marseille, Bordeaux, and Nantes before returning to Paris. Toulouse was later added to break the long haul across southern France from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. Stages would go through the night and finish the next afternoon, with rest days before riders set off again. But this proved too daunting and the cost too great for most, and only 15 competitors had entered. Mr. Ranch had never been wholly convinced, and he came close to dropping the idea. Instead, he cut the length to 19 days, changed the dates from the 1st to the 19th of July, and offered a daily allowance to those who averaged at least 20 kilometers per hour on all the stages, equivalent to what a rider would have expected to earn each day had he worked in a factory. He also cut out the entry fee from 20 to 10 francs and set the first prize at 12,000 francs, at the prize of each day's winner at 3,000 francs. The winner would thereby win 6 times what most workers earned in a year. That attracted between 50 and 80 entrants. The higher number may have included serious inquiries and some who dropped out, among those not just professionals but amateurs, some unemployed, some simply adventurous. Now, the first Tour de France started almost outside Café Revel-Martin at the junction of Melun and Corbel roads in the village of Montgrand. It was waved away by the starter, Georges Albrand, at 3:16 p.m. on the 1st of July, 1903. L'Auto had not featured the race on its front page that morning. Now, among the competitors were the eventual winner, Maurice Garin, his well-built Hippolyte Aquatour, the German favorite Joseph Fischer, and a collection of adventurers, including one competing as Samson. Many riders dropped out of the race after completing the initial stages, as the physical effort the tour required was just too much. Only a mere 24 entrants remained at the end of the 4th stage. Well, they dropping like flies. The race finished on the edge of Paris at Ville d'Avray, outside the restaurant de Pierre Otto, before a ceremonial ride into Paris and several laps of the Parc des Princes. Garin dominated the race, winning the first and last 2 stages at 25.68 kilometers per hour. The last rider, Arsène Marchelot, finished in 64 hours, 57 minutes, and 8 seconds behind him. Wow. Now, L'Auto's mission was accomplished as circulation of the publication doubled throughout the race, making the race something much larger than Desjardins had ever hoped for. Now, such was the passion that the first tour created in spectators and riders was that Desjardins said the 1904 Tour de France would be the last. Cheating was rife, and riders were beaten up by rival fans as they neared the top of the Col de la République, sometimes called the Col de Grand Bois, outside of Saint-Étienne. The leading riders, including winner Maurice Garin, were disqualified, though it took the Union Velopédique de France until the 30th November to make the decision. Magan said the UVF awaited so long, well aware of the passion aroused by the race. Desjardins' opinion of the fighting and cheating showed the headline in his reaction in L'Auto. The end. By the following spring, Desjardins was planning a longer tour with 11 stages instead of 6, and this time all the stages would take place during daylight hours to make cheating more noticeable. In 1905, the stages started between 3 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. The race captivated audiences and returned after a hiatus during World War I, continuing to grow in popularity. Desjardins in his tour invented bicycle stage racing. Desjardins experimented with different ways of judging the winner. Initially, he used total accumulated time, as in the modern, but from 1906 to 1912, by points for placings each day. Desjardins saw problems in judging both by time and by points. By time, a rider coping with a mechanical problem, which the rules insisted he repair alone, could lose so much time that it cost him the race. Equally, riders could finish so separated that time gained or lost on 1 or 2 days could decide the whole race. Judging the race by points removed the over-influential time differences, but discouraged competitors from riding hard. It made no difference whether they finished last or slow or separated by seconds or hours, so long as they were inclined to ride together at a relaxed pace until close to the line, only then disputing the final placings that would give them points. I remember seeing sometimes when a team would ride with like 4 or 5 riders, and then, you know, if all 5 of them came across in second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they could rack up the points that way as the team.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it kind of detracted from the ability of time speed. You know, if the guy in first place gets 5 points for the first place finish, he gets outpointed by the other 5 guys. It's like, oops, I'm sorry, we only have one fast guy on our team. Well, you know, it happens.
I guess I can kind of understand why they had to go back and forth, but in a way, it's kind of like NASCAR to my brain.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you have to stop at the pit to get fixed and get tires and gas and all that, and that can make a difference. So, yeah, you have to fix it. I don't know whether they had to fix it by themselves, maybe to make sure nobody's cheating, but I don't know exactly how you can cheat at biking.
Yeah, unless you have suddenly drop another guy on your bike who's more rested. But even then, that dude doesn't look right, you know?
Right? As I say, you'd have to have like maybe a twin or a triplet, because people are going to notice you changed appearances. Even if they can't see your face, the body's going to be different. Yeah. And they may not notice right away, but they're going to notice eventually.
Yeah. And I remember reading sometimes in some of the other races, the thing they would have is you would have van crews that would go along with the riders, and that way, if you know you have a flat tire or something, they could swap one out real quick for you. And I'm like, well, that works if you got the money for it, but you know, if you're just an adventurous sort of type, a flat tire, oh, congratulations, you just got eliminated. Now, again, the format would change over time. The tour originally ran around the perimeter of France. Cycling was an endurance sport, and organizers realized that sales would be achieved by creating supermen of the competitors. Night riding was dropped after the second tour in 1904, when there had been persistent cheating when judges could not see the riders. That reduced the daily and overall distance, but the emphasis remained on endurance. The first mountain stages in the Pyrenees appeared in 1910. Early tours had long, multi-day stages, with the format settling on 15 stages from 1910 until 1924. After this, stages were gradually shortened, such that by 1936 there were as many as 3 stages in a single day. Though Desranges initially preferred to see the tour as a race of individuals, the most tours were open to whoever wanted to compete. Most riders were in teams that looked after them, and the private entrants were called tourist routiers, tourists of the road, from 1923, and were allowed to take part provided they make no demands on the organizers. Some of the tour's most colorful characters have been tourist routiers. One finished the day's race and then performed acrobatic tricks on the street to raise the price of a hotel. Until 1925, this run forbade team members from pacing each other. 1927 to 28 tours, however, consisted mainly of team time trials, an unsuccessful experiment which sought to avoid the proliferation of sprint finishers on flat stages. Until 1930, Desrange demanded the riders mend their bicycles without help and that they use the same bicycle from start to end. Exchanging a damaged bicycle for another was allowed only in 1923. Desrange stood against the use of multiple gears, and for many years insisted riders use wooden rims, fearing the heat of braking while coming down mountains would melt the glue that held the tires on the metal rims. However, they were finally allowed in 1937.
I worry about wooden ones breaking.
Yeah. By the end of the 1920s, Desrange believed he could not beat what he believed were the underhand tactics of bike factories. When in 1929 the Alceron team contrived to get Maurice de Waal to win even though he was sick, he said, "My race has been won by a corpse." In 1930, Desrange again attempted to take control of the tour from teams, insisting competitors enter in national teams rather than trade teams, and that competitors ride plain yellow bikes that he would provide without a maker's name. There was no place for individuals in the post-1930s teams, so Desferon created regional teams, generally from France, to take in riders who would not or otherwise have qualified. The original tourist routers mostly disappeared, but some were absorbed into the regional teams. Now, Desferon would die at his home on the Mediterranean coast on the 16th of August, 1940. The race was taken over by his deputy, Jacques Gaudet, and the tour was again disrupted by war after 1939 and did not return until 1947. Now, in 1944, the auto was closed, the doors nailed shut, and its belongings, including the tour, sesquidated in by the state for publishing articles too close to the Germans. Rights to the tour were therefore owned by the government. Jacques Gaudet was allowed to publish another daily sports paper, L'Equipe, but there was a rival candidate to run the tour, a consortium of sports and mirror sport. Each organized a candidate to race. L'Equipe and Le Parisien Liberté had Le Course du Tour de France, while Sports and Mirror Sprint had La Ronde de France. Both had 5 stages, the longest the government would allow because of shortages. L'Equipe race was better organized and appealed more to the public because it featured national teams that had been successful before the war when French cycling was at a high. L'Equipe was given the right to organize the 1947 Tour de France. However, L'Equipe's finances were never sound, and Gaudet accepted an advance by Emilien Amare, who had supported his bid to run the post-war tour. Amare was a newspaper magnate whose sole condition was that the sports editor, Felix Levatin, should join Gaudet for the tour. The two worked together, with Gaudet running the sporting side and Levatin the financial. Now, on the tour's return, the format of the race was settled between 20 and 25 stages. Most stages would last one day, but the scheduling of split stages continued well into the 1980s. In 1953 saw the introduction of the Green Jersey Points competition, and national teams contested the tour until 1961. The teams were of different sizes. Some nations had more than one team, and some were mixed in with others to make up the number. National teams caught the public imagination, but had a snag. That riders might normally have been rival trade teams the rest of the season. The loyalty of riders was sometimes questionable within and between teams. Sponsors were always unhappy about releasing the riders into anonymity for the biggest race of the year, as riders of the national teams wore the colors of their country in a small cloth panel on their chest that named the team for what they normally rode. The situation became critical at the start of the 1960s. Sales of bicycles had fallen, and bicycle factories were closing. There was a risk, the trade said, that the industry would die if factories were not allowed to the publicity of the Tour de France. The tour allowed the return of trade teams in 1962. The same year, Emilien Amare, the owner of Parisian Liberté, became financially involved in the tour. He made Felix Levatin the co-organizer of the tour, and he decided that Levatin would focus on the financial issues, while Jacques Gaudet was put in charge of the sporting issues. The Tour de France was meant for professional cyclists, but in 1961 the organization started Tour Le Vanard, the amateur version. Twice, in 1949 and 52, Italian rider Fausto Coppi won the Giro d'Italia and the Tour of France in the same year, the first rider to do so. Louis-Anne Bobet was the first great French rider of the post-war period, and was the first rider to win the Tour de France in 3 successive years, in 53, 54, and 55. Jacques Antoine became the first cyclist to win the Tour 5 times, in 57, and then from 61 to 64. He stated before the 61 Tour that he would gain the yellow jersey on day 1 and wear it all through the tour, a tall order with 2 previous winners on the field, Charles Gaulle and Federico Badamontes, but he did it. His victories in stage races such as the Tour were built on exceptional ability to ride alone against the clock in the individual time trial stages, which lent him the name Monsieur Chrono. Anquet enjoyed a rivalry with Raymond Poulidor, who is known as the Eternal Second, because he never won the Tour despite finishing second place 3 times and third place 5 times, including a final Tour at the age of 40. Now, doping had become a serious issue, culminating in the death of Tom Simpson in 1967, after which riders went on strike, although the organizers suspected sponsors provoked them. The Union Cyclists International introduced limits to daily and overall distances, imposed rest days, and tests were introduced for riders. It was then impossible to follow the frontiers, and the Tour increasingly zigzagged across the country, sometimes with unconnected days races linked by train, while still maintaining some sort of loop. The Tour returned to the national teams in 67 and 68 as an experiment, and the Tour returned to trade teams in 69 with the suggestion national teams could come back every few years, but this has not happened since. Now, in the early 70s, the race was dominated by Eddie Merckx, who won the general classification 5 times, mountain classification twice, and the points classification 3 times, and held the record for the most stage victories of 34 before being overtaken by Mark Cavendish in 2024. Merckx's dominating style earned him the nickname the Cannibal. In 69, he already had a commanding lead when he launched a long-distance solo attack in the mountains, which none of the other elite riders could answer, resulting in an eventual winning margin of nearly 18 minutes. In 73, he did not win because he did not enter the Tour. Instead, his great rival, Louis O'Connor, won. Merckx's winning streak came to an end when he finished second to Bernard Thievent in 1975. But during this era, race director Felix Levatin began to recruit additional sponsors, sometimes accepting prizes in kind if he could not get cash. In 75, the polka dot jersey was introduced for the winner of the mountains classification. In the same year, Levatin introduced the finish of the Tour at the Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Since then, this stage has largely been ceremonial, as generally only contested as a prestigious sprinter stage. Occasionally, a rider will be given the honor of leading the rest of the peloton onto the circuit finish in the final Tour, as was the case for Jean Voigt and Sylvain Chavanel, among others. From the 70s until the 80s, the Tour was dominated by Frenchman Bernard Hinault, who had become the third rider to win 5 times. Hinault was defeated by Joop Zoetemelk in 1980 when he withdrew, and only once in his Tour de France career he was soundly defeated, and that was by Laurent Fignon in 1984. In 86, Hinault had won the year before. American rider Greg LeMond, supporting him, publicly pledged to ride in support of LeMond. Several attacks during the race cast doubt on the sincerity of his promise, leading to a rift between the two riders in the entire Le Viclair team before LeMond prevailed. It was the first ever victory for a rider from outside of Europe. The 86 is considered to be one of the memorable in history as a sport due to the battle between LeMond and Hinault. In 87, the edition was even more uncertain than past editions, as previous winners Hamant and Zoffanick had retired. LeMond was absent, and Fignon suffered from a lingering injury. As such, the race was highly competitive, and the lead changed hands 8 times before Stephen Roche won. When Roche won the World Championship road race later in the season, he became only the second rider after Merck to win cycling's Triple Crown, which meant winning the Giro d'Italia, the Tour, and the Road World Cycling Championship in one calendar year. Now, Levatin helped drive an international drive for the Tour de France and cycling in general. Roche was the first winner from Ireland. However, in the years leading up to the victory, cyclists from numerous other countries began joining the ranks of the peloton. In 82, Sean Kelly of Ireland and Phil Anderson of Australia became the first winners of any Tour classification from outside cycling's continental Europe Ireland, while Levatin was influential in facilitating participation in the Tour of '83 by amateur riders from the Eastern Bloc and Colombia. In '84, for the first time, the Société de Tour de la France organized the Tour de la France Féminine, a version for women. It was run in the same weeks as the men's version, and it was won by Marianne Martin. Well, when global awareness and popularity of the Tour grew at this time, its finances became stretched. Godet and Leviton continued to clash over the running of the race, and Leviton launched the Tour of America as a precursor to his plans to take the Tour de France to the U.S. The Tour of America lost a lot of money and appeared to be cross-financed by Tour de France. In its years before '87, Leviton's position had always been protected by Emilien Amanari, then the owner of ASO, but Emilien Amari would soon retire and leave son Philippe Amari responsible. When Leviton arrived at his office on March 17, 1987, he found his doors were locked and he was fired. The organization of the '87 Tour de France was taken over by Jean-François Noguet-Radicut. He was not successful in acquiring more funds and was fired after 1 year. Now, months before the start of the '88 Tour, director Jean-François Noguet-Radicut was replaced by Xavier Lloyd. In '88, the Tour was organized by Jean-Pierre Courcoul, the director of L'Equipe, and then in '89 by Jean-Pierre Carreneau and then Jean-Marie Leblanc, who in '89 had been the race director. The former television presenter Christian Prudhomme, he commented on the Tour among other events, replaced LeBlanc in '07, having been assistant director for 3 years. The 1993 ownership of L'Equipe moved to the Amari Group, which formed Amari Sports Organization to oversee sports operations, though the Tour itself was operated by a subsidiary of the Société de Tour de France. In '88 onward was arguably the beginning of what could be best referred to as the doping era. A new drug, erythropoietin, or EPO, began to be used and could not be detected by drug tests at the time. Pedro Delgado won the '88 by a considerable margin, and in '89 and '90, Le Mans returned from injury and won the Tour in back-to-back. With the 1989 edition still standing in its closet, a two-way battle in TDF history, and Le Mans claimed an 8-second victory with a final time trial to best Warrant-Fignon. Well, the early 1990s was dominated by Spaniard Miguel Indurain, who won 5 tours from '91 to '95, the fourth and last to win 5 times, and only the 5th time winner to achieve those victories consecutively. He won the race leader's yellow jersey in the Tour de France for 60 days. He holds the record for the most consecutive Tour de France wins and shares the record for most wins with Jacques Adequy, Bernard Hinault, and Eddie Merckx. Indurain was a strong time trialist, gaining on rivals and riding defensively in the climbing stages. Indurain won only 2 tour stages that are not individual time trials, mountain stages to Conneretz and Les Ardennes in '89 and '90 in the Pyrenees. These superior abilities and discipline fit perfectly with the time trials heavy tours of the era, with many featuring between 150 and 200 kilometers of time trialing versus the more common 50 to 80 kilometers today. Now, the influence and influx of more international riders continued through the period, and the 1996 race was won for the first time by a rider from Denmark, by Jean Ries, who ended Miguel Indurain's reign with an attack on Houstekam. In the 25th of May, 2007, Jean Ries admitted that he placed first in the Tour de France using banned substances, and he is no longer considered the winner by Tour's organizers. In 2008, the Tour reconfirmed the victory, but with an asterisk labeled to indicate his doping offenses. In 2013, John Ulrich, the first German rider to win the Tour, admitted to blood doping. In 1998, at the Tour de France, a doping scandal known as the Festina Affair shook the sport to its core when it became apparent that there was a systemic doping going on in the sport. Numerous riders and a handful of teams were either thrown out of the race or left to their own free will, and the end of the Marco Patani survived to win his lone tour in a decimated main field. The 1999 Tour de France was billed as a tour of renewal as the sport tried to clean up its image and following the doping fiasco of the previous year. Initially, it seemed to be a Cinderella story. Everybody's famous. Lance Armstrong stole the show and kept on riding to the first of his astonishing 7 consecutive Tour de France victories. However, in retrospect, 1999 was just the beginning of the doping problem getting worse. Following his retirement in 2005, the 2006 edition saw former teammate Floyd Landis finally get the chance to win the Tour de France, the final time trial, with a stunning and improbable solo breakaway at stage 17. Not long after the tour was over, however, he admitted to doping and had his tour win revoked. Over the next few years, a new star, Alberto Contador, came into the scene. However, during the 2007, a veteran Danish rider, Michael Rasmussen, went on in the Melot June late in the tour in position to win when his own team sacked him for a possible doping infraction, thus allowing the rising star Contador to ride mistake-free for the remaining stages to win the first. So, it, like anything, people are enjoying it. Guess what? People are going to dope their way through if they can get away with it. I remember when both Miguel Indurain and Lance Armstrong were big names. I remember when our other buddy, Lamond, came back and won back-to-back tours. It was incredible watching these guys try to bike up these hills. And you had to sit there and think, how in the world did they pull off such an event? Of course, I also remember one time they actually had them start in London, of all places, and go through the tunnel. And then they biked around France. That was kind of cool. But, for people that are really athletic and have a lot of endurance, biking is a lot of fun. But coming up in this next month, if you're not busy watching the World Cup, just turn it on and watch these guys go out there and pump their legs and get some exercise out of it. Enjoy France. But this has been the Bearded Historian. You folks have a good one, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.